Superman landing in the MCU sounds like the greatest crossover in superhero history, until you realize he might completely break it. I know, I've just burst your bubble of excitement, but I have my reasons for it. For a second, imagine an ultra-powerful alien with almost no physical limits entering a universe built on flawed, sarcastic, and emotionally messy heroes. That changes everything. I know, the DCU isn't perfect either, and it has all these attributes as well. But the thing is, it's built around Superman, and he perfectly fits inside it like a piece of a puzzle. But the MCU? No chance. The power scaling, the Avengers, the stakes, and even the tone of the MCU itself. Now here's the real question. Which should matter? Would Marvel finally make Superman feel more human, or accidentally destroy what makes him so iconic in the first place? Let's find out. Before we start with the discussion, we need to understand that Superman and the MCU operate on two completely different storytelling philosophies. They're like fire and water, or salt and sugar. They aren't meant to go together. In DC, especially in the modern Superman stories, Clark Kent is often portrayed as something larger than life. He's not just a superhero, he's an ideal, a symbol. His stories are filled with themes of hope, destiny, morality, and responsibility on a near mythological scale. Even visually, Superman is framed like a titan walking among humans. Think Man of Steel and Snyderverse. The tone is grand, emotional, and almost biblical at times. The MCU, on the other hand, does the complete opposite. Marvel's entire cinematic formula is built around relatability. Tony Stark jokes through trauma. Thor gets laughed at for doing normal human-level things. Peter Parker stops to have a conversation mid-battle. Even the cosmic beings in the MCU are treated like flawed people first and powerful beings second. The tonal difference alone changes Superman immediately, because if Superman existed in the MCU, Marvel wouldn't treat him like a distant symbol. They'd humanize him aggressively. He'd probably be awkward, emotionally conflicted, and self-aware. That's because the MCU doesn't allow icons to remain untouchable for too long. It pulls them down to earth. And honestly, that's gone either brilliantly or disastrously. However, there's a risk in all this. If you overhumanize Superman, you start losing the larger-than-life aura he holds. Because Superman has always worked because he feels impossible. He represents the ideal humanity that all of us struggle to reach. If Marvel turns him into another Thor, then the myth collapses. And if you ask me, the MCU has a habit of doing exactly that. Now let's talk about the elephant in the room. Power scaling. Because if Superman enters the MCU, the balance of the entire universe changes overnight. And that'll be a major problem because the universe already struggles with this. Thor can survive the energy of a dying star in one movie, yet struggle against weaker enemies in another. Hulk's strength fluctuates depending on the story, and so on. Now imagine adding Superman into that equation. This is a character fast enough to reverse Earth's rotation, powerful enough to move planets, survive nuclear explosions without a scratch, hear cries across continents, and destroy cosmic-level threats alone. Once someone like that enters the MCU, every future conflict immediately raises uncomfortable questions. That's exactly why Superman works better in the DCU than in Marvel. DC's universe is already designed around titans among men: Wonder Woman, Dr. Fate, Martian Manhunter. These characters exist in a mythological system where absurd levels of power are normal, and the MCU isn't really built like that. Its tension often comes from vulnerability. Steve Rogers gets overwhelmed. Tony Stark bleeds. Thor loses constantly before finally hitting back. And Peter Parker? He's just a kid. Superman changes that dynamic because his baseline is already beyond almost everyone, and the Avengers would immediately feel it. Tony Stark especially would probably hate Superman at first. Not because Clark is evil or because he's powerful, but because he represents something Tony distrusts: unchecked power wrapped inside moral certainty. Tony already struggled with Cap because his morality challenged Stark's worldview. Now imagine someone infinitely stronger than Cap, almost impossible to physically stop, while also possessing the same moral resilience. That'd be Tony's worst nightmare. And honestly, I don't blame him, because the MCU has already shown us the dangers of overpowered characters operating without limits. Loki invaded and tried to destroy the Earth. Ultron nearly wiped out humanity. Wanda enslaved an entire town through grief. And these are just some examples. The Sokovia Accords were created for a reason. Even though they weren't 100% right, they really paved the path for something. Now imagine an alien who could flatten continents without flinching loses control. This would make the Avengers and the government scared. Not because Superman's evil, but because there's nobody that could really stop him if he goes rogue. You'd be lying if you didn't know this was coming. One of the most interesting things about placing Superman inside the MCU is how quickly he becomes political. In DC, Superman often exists above politics. He inspires humanity broadly. Yes, the government does fear him sometimes, but usually he's framed as morally incorruptible. The MCU, on the other hand, wouldn't do that. Marvel's universe constantly asks whether superheroes should be regulated, monitored, or even controlled. Civil War and Captain America: The Winter Soldier easily prove this point. Instead of being treated as the saviors and heroes, the Avengers are constantly treated as dangerous global assets. So if Superman arrived in this universe, it'd cause total political chaos. Think about it for a minute. An all-powerful alien appears out of nowhere. He can destroy nuclear arsenals, bypass borders in seconds, hear military communication, and is almost impossible to restrain. No government on Earth would simply trust him because he says he's good or because he smiles politely. The media would tear him apart. Some people would worship him as a savior, while others would call him an alien weapon. Clark Kent's real problem in the MCU wouldn't be physical strength. It'll be trust. His biggest challenge would be to live in a world that constantly questions his intentions. Despite everything we've discussed, there's one thing Marvel could genuinely improve: Clark Kent himself. Now, I'm talking about Clark Kent, not Superman. Because for years, many live-action Superman adaptations have been obsessed with making Superman darker, moodier, and more conflicted physically. Sometimes, they forgot that Clark exists and that he's supposed to feel empathetic, deeply human, and warm. The MCU actually excels at emotional accessibility. Characters talk more naturally. Relationships feel conversational. Humor creates intimacy. Vulnerability feels visible. That style would work beautifully for Clark Kent. You can imagine him awkwardly trying to fit into ordinary life while secretly carrying impossible responsibility. Imagine him connecting emotionally with Peter Parker over isolation, or inspiring Sam through a simple act of kindness. That's where the MCU could genuinely shine. Not by making Superman stronger, but by making Clark Kent feel emotionally alive. Because at its core, Superman isn't iconic because he can lift planets. He's iconic because, despite having serious cosmic powers, he still chooses compassion. So, would Superman work in the MCU? Yes, but only if Marvel understands that Superman cannot simply become another MCU character. He's not just a superhero, he's the superhero. He's a philosophical presence, a living ideal dropped into a universe built around flawed people trying to survive chaos. If Marvel fully embraces his humanity, Clark Kent could become more emotionally relatable than ever before. However, if they dilute his mythological weight, overload him with jokes, or reduce him to another CGI powerhouse fighting skybeams, then Superman loses the very thing that makes him timeless. Superman is Superman because he feels realistic. He's Superman when he feels impossible, yet still chooses to be good. And maybe that's the real reason Superman belongs in DC. Not because he's too powerful for the MCU, but because myth survives better in a world willing to take hope seriously. So, what do you think? Would Superman thrive in the MCU? Or would he become another Thor? Comment down your thoughts below. While you're there, make sure to hit the like button and subscribe to the Multiverse Index for more Marvel and DC breakdowns, theories, and what-ifs.